Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. I'm Shawna Khalafi. As the conflict in the Middle East continues to intensify, we want to bring in an expert on terrorism, cybersecurity, and national security, Javed Ali, the professor at the University of Michigan's Ford School of Public Policy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Shawna, nice to be with you this evening. Thank you.
So we have a lot of questions about both what's going on in Iran and the regional implications of all of this. So this situation seems to be progressing pretty rapidly. We are just a few days in. So from your own experience in the National Security Council, can you tell us how serious is this current confrontation with Iran, maybe compared to past events?
So, Shawna, what's been happening now the past few days, this is unprecedented. The United States has never launched a military campaign like the one that we're seeing, and is still underway even as we're talking, against Iran. The last two times this happened, it was in January 2020 with a very targeted strike against the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force Commander Qasem Soleimani, the Baghdad airport, and that was a major deal. And Iran did not respond proportionally then, I thought. And then going back to last summer, if your viewers remember, the strikes by the United States in the middle of, or towards the end of Israel's 12-day war against Iran, against the 3 nuclear facilities. And that was also a major development. And Iran also did not respond proportionally, I thought, as well. So in those past 2 moments where the U.S. and Iran were in direct conflict with each other, it was very limited, very brief, but still very significant. But here we are now into day 3 of this conflict, war, whatever the right term is. And the U.S. and Israel have now launched thousands of missions against probably hundreds, if not more, targets in Iran. We heard from Secretary Hegseth today and President Trump. This is going to go on for some period of time. And the Iranians, despite the restraint they showed in the past 2 cycles of conflict, and there are probably a lot of reasons for that, the gloves are off for Iran too. And we've seen, even over the past 3 days, Iran use ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, not only against Israel like they did last year into 2024, but against this whole array of U.S. facilities and military bases in the region. We have the tragic death of 6 U.S. service personnel, other countries, commercial interests have been hit, and civilians have died in those countries as well in the Gulf. So this is only day 3, and I think it's going to look like this for the next few days and may even intensify beyond what we've seen over these last 72 hours.
And as this has continued, we've seen even more countries get involved in this conflict. So let's talk about the wider regional implications of this in the Middle East. As more countries are starting to get involved, what indicators would you look for that could signal a broader regional war starting there?
Well, Iran has already broadened it because they have targeted either U.S. facilities or tried to target military personnel, or, again, just firing these weapons into Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Dubai, Jordan, and then Israel, of course. So Iran has already tried to widen it, and it's very difficult to know what the new Iranian leadership is thinking. But I suspect that this very deliberate strategy that is totally not restrained is an attempt to not only impose the actual cost to kill people, to destroy or damage buildings and infrastructure, but to also have the Gulf countries, or these affected countries, put pressure back on the White House to put an end to the U.S. and Israeli campaign, because they are being directly affected by this, and all the economic interests and commercial interests and cultural ties between Iran and all these countries. So that, I think, is a dynamic going on, and that's why I think Iran has come out so aggressively, even though they are getting hit very hard by the U.S. and Israel.
And if Iran does continue with this retaliation, how might they change their approach? It's been pretty much the same so far, but are they likely to maybe change that strategy? Could it include maybe directly targeting U.S. forces through other proxy groups, or even cyber attacks? I know you're an expert in that category as well.
Yeah, Shawna. So Iran is, as we all know, is the world's biggest state sponsor of terrorism, has been so for decades. And over the past couple decades, it is through an organization in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps called the Quds Force. That organization has trained, equipped, supported, and directed the groups in that in the axis of resistance. So Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, other Shia militias in Iraq and previously in Syria. So I think because the regime is facing an existential threat from the U.S. and Israel and has already suffered serious losses with the death of the supreme leader and other senior Iranian officials, that they will probably turn to these partners in the axis of resistance and direct them to get involved in a way that they likewise haven't done, or at least haven't done in a coordinated fashion with Iran. And so we saw earlier today Hezbollah firing rockets into Israel. Now, Israel has responded forcefully too, but so we could see the axis of resistance getting involved that way, but we could also see terrorism. And this is also where the Quds Force can play a significant role, both in the partnership they've had with the groups to conduct actual acts of terrorism. And the one group that stands out amongst all of them is Lebanese Hezbollah, because in the 80s and 90s, Hezbollah had killed more Americans overseas than any group until Al-Qaeda after 9/11. So Hezbollah, going back to that period of time, has already showed they can be very lethal in the region, certainly in Lebanon. Will Hezbollah try to conduct terrorist attacks against U.S. interest in Lebanon or elsewhere? Maybe. Will the Quds Force and Hezbollah try to project or direct external terrorist attacks into other parts of the Middle East, into Europe, Asia, Africa? It's not inconceivable or out of the realm of imagination. And then there's a separate category of threats on the cyber side, which Iran also has fairly significant capabilities, and they've used those against the United States going back to the 2010. So there's this whole other toolkit that Iran could use that they necessarily haven't used. But if they use terrorism or cyber operations, then I think things will escalate even further.
Let's talk a little bit more about that concern, especially for people here in the U.S. If this exchange of attacks continues, should Americans be concerned about a more direct, targeted hit even within the country or other homeland security risks at play here?
Yeah, that's another great question, Shawna. I don't, and I've said this or made this assessment on several interviews over the past few days. I don't think there is a realistic or a high probability type of threat from Iranian or Hezbollah attacks here inside the United States. We've seen Iran try to conduct terrorist attacks in the U.S. going back to 2011, but time and time again, every time they try to launch one of these plots here, it falls apart because it's not very professional. They have to rely on criminals and biker gangs and drug dealers and other people who are not professionals in this world and are not trained to engage in these acts of terrorism. And they don't have a presence of people from these security organizations here in the United States either. So it's very difficult for Iran to pull off an attack here. Doesn't mean they won't try, but from what we've seen in the past, these plots have been fairly amateurish for the most part. But they could do that in other parts of the world where there are Iranian Quds Force officers on the ground or officers from their intelligence service. So that threat may be higher in other parts of the world, and they may target Americans there. But the gloves are off from the regime. And if they're conducting the kind of attacks we're seeing right now in the region, it wouldn't be a stretch to suggest that they would think about acts of terrorism against U.S. interests or Israeli interests or Israeli interests somewhere in the world if they have the capability to do that. I just don't think they have the capability to do that here.
And we heard several times from the Trump administrations what their demands were going into the nuclear talks with Iran. And now that this has started and been progressing, the exchange of attacks, what would a successful outcome look like for the U.S. at this point? And then we'll also talk about the same question for Iran and Israel as well. What do they want as an outcome now that we are so deep in this conflict at this point?
All very good questions as well, Shawna. So maybe on the U.S. side, let's take that one first. Maybe what success looks like is destroying Iran's ability to produce uranium, and that was one of the key demands from President Trump starting a couple months ago, or terminating its ability to produce a nuclear weapon, even though nobody thinks they have one right now. Second one might be removing as many of the senior leaders currently within the IRGC, and there's now a 3-person committee that is going to be the transition until another supreme leader is picked. So maybe that's what success looks like, or maybe it's actual regime collapse, and so. In that scenario, that would mean that dozens more senior officials at the upper echelons of the Iranian clerical and military establishment are killed, and then there is some kind of new government that comes into play. Prospects for that, what does that look like? Or, the probability of that, unclear right now, because there's no single person standing outside that seems to have the standing that would be able to come into Iran and do that. On the flip side, and I think the Israeli perspective would generally be the same. Now, on the Iranian side, I think what victory would look like, or success would look like, is to for the regime, or some aspect of the regime, even if they continue to lose senior people, to survive relatively intact. So there still is an Islamic Republic of Iran, may look different, may have different leaders, and maybe it'll change its orientation and behavior towards Israel and the United States. And that would be almost the Venezuela model, where even in the aftermath of President Maduro being captured and brought to the United States, his second in command was fleeted up to be the president, and that person is now trying to change the behavior of Venezuela and take more direction from the U.S. So is that something that might unfold as well? And again, maybe that's what success looks like on the Iranian side, where they don't lose control, they just have to bend in the direction more of the United States. But it's too early, I think, for any of those scenarios to become clear at this point.
And the last thing here before we let you go, I mean, this seems to be progressing very rapidly. Every hour we're getting new updates, new strikes, some more countries getting involved. As this progresses, what are you going to be looking towards? I know the Trump administration has said this could last weeks. What are you anticipating in the days and weeks ahead here?
So we're going to have to watch and see, will the U.S. send even more military capability to the region? There's already such a significant amount, with 2 carrier battle groups, hundreds of other planes have been sent in addition to the ones that are on the carriers themselves. And there's 30,000 plus U.S. personnel scattered across 13 bases. So are we going to flow, or will the U.S. flow even more into the region? And now doing it in an active conflict zone, which will make it logistically even harder to do that, I would think. At the same time, will there be some resumption of diplomatic talks where the current committee that is now running Iran, will they be forced to the table and sue for peace because of the pressure that's being put on them and the national security establishment in Iran? Unclear if that's going to happen, but we should be looking for that. And then on the broader level, how many other countries will get involved in offensive operations against Iran? Right now, it's still just Israel and the United States, but all these other countries, as we've talked about in the region, are getting attacked. So will they switch from being on the defensive side, trying to prevent these Iranian attacks, to then going on the offensive side and now joining the air campaign that's already underway? So those are 3 things that we all need to look at in the next few days or weeks.
And the world is watching very closely as this conflict intensifies in the Middle East. Javed Ali, professor of public policy at the University of Michigan, we really appreciate your input and your time tonight.
All right, great. Thanks, Shawna.
Thank you.